I recall that night as if it were yesterday. It was an unusually warm evening for our small northern Michigan town, even in late August. Storms had passed through during dinner, leaving faint rumbles that still echoed in the distance. The wind, which had been pushing the clouds eastward, suddenly stopped, and the humid air lingered heavily around us. The curtains, once whipped by the wind, now hung limply by my open window. Though the rain had faded, the occasional drip still echoed into my second-story room, barely audible through the screen. It was a good thing, too, as the rain had brought a record crop of mosquitoes and other pests. The buzzing of distant cicadas in the treetops provided a steady rhythm, while moths kept banging against the window screen, drawn by the lamp on my desk. I could have turned off the light, but I wasn't tired, and it was still early. The bugs weren't bothersome as long as they stayed outside. My thoughts wandered from the window back to my room. In one corner stood the desk, and in the two other corners, two small beds were tucked in, one of which I was lying on. A small closet completed the room. The other bed was empty now, since my older brother Noah had moved into a second room down the hall. With my two oldest brothers away at college, it was just the four of us in the three-bedroom house. Noah's presence used to annoy me endlessly, but I had to admit the room felt too quiet without him, without his constant noise. Luckily, he had moved out a few months ago, and I hadn't been subjected to his new friends, his new music, or his wardrobe of nothing but black. I still remembered Dad's reaction when Noah walked into the kitchen one morning wearing a studded collar and pierced ears. Dad almost choked, and Mom just stared, wide-eyed, before they both looked at me. "Don't worry about it." "I don't get it either," I said, and they seemed relieved, though not entirely convinced. Time, as it does, has a way of changing how we see things. Unbeknownst to us all, time would soon prove itself to be a trickster. We finished breakfast, and Noah, with his usual attitude, drifted outside at the sound of a car horn. Dad settled into the Sunday paper, commenting only when something in the article aggravated him. I grabbed my dishes and rinsed them in the sink, and as I passed by, Mom ran her hand over my head, commenting on my unruly curls. It would soon be time for another haircut, but there was no rush, school was still a month away. She liked to say she had to pay for those curls, even though I got them for free. Grandma often made similar comments when we visited. I didn't quite understand why back then, but I loved the attention, and it felt good. After breezing through the comics, I was ready to run outside and enjoy the day when Mom intercepted me at the foot of the stairs, a mitt in hand. "Stay in the lot next door, and if the ball goes into the weeds, grab another one. Don't go into the woods, and only drink from this," she said, handing me a sealed bottle of water. "Make sure the cap is on tight when you're not drinking, and don't refill it from anywhere, got it?" I rolled my eyes beneath my long lashes, letting out a dramatic sigh as I put on my baseball cap. "Yes, Mom." "Thanks." She stepped aside, letting me go. "And be home by 5 for dinner." "That's an order." I didn't respond but waved my glove in the air as I ran off to join the group of kids gathering next door. Mom watched me leave before turning back toward the kitchen. I wasn't tall by any means, just a bundle of knees and elbows, as Grandma liked to say when I walked into the room. Overprotective? Perhaps, but no more than any other mother would be in that situation. The adults in our small community were all on edge. Daily meetings with authorities, combined with the fear of an unknown threat lurking in our town, had everyone under immense pressure. Even the CDC had made an appearance, which only added to the tension. Meanwhile, the kids, fascinated, watched in awe as the team of scientists wandered the town with their gadgets, nets, and equipment. Some even ventured into the nearby swampland, fully covered in their protective suits. Summer was in full swing, school was out, but our access to the outside world was limited. The town officials had enacted a curfew, and anyone under 21 had to stay indoors from dusk to dawn. This wasn't a problem for most kids my age. When the sun went down, the mosquitoes came out in full force, giving us all the incentive we needed to stay inside. Sleepovers became a regular occurrence at one house or another, and the parents seemed oddly eager to participate. It was the same response as the year before when a kid had been abducted after school, just a defensive reaction to fear. But this time, it was different. A very real threat had quietly entered town, and no one, not even the government scientists, could identify it. It all started nearly 3 months earlier, when school had just let out for the summer. That simple fact helped to mask what was about to unfold in our quiet town. The summer began hot, following a long, rainy spring, and it felt like the answer to all our prayers. The community pool, which had opened on Memorial Day weekend, hadn't been inviting at first due to cooler weather. But now, with the heat in full force, it had become a popular spot. I was lucky that my mom didn't work. She proudly claimed the title of domestic engineer when asked, but still found time to take me to the pool for a few hours. It was totally uncool for my brother and his friends, who disappeared during the day only to call from one of their friends' homes when curfew approached. Being a small town, word always got out about whatever trouble they got into. Mom enjoyed getting out of the house to chat with the other domestic engineers while their kids played in the pool. A few days passed without incident, water was cool, sunscreen was applied, and everything felt normal. Then, on June 10th, a Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Another mother arrived, greeted the usual group, and took her spot with her 2 children. Even though they went to the other school in town, I recognized the Johnson brothers. Jimmy, the 10-year-old with red hair, was outgoing and liked by everyone, which I hated him for. His older brother Tim was the opposite, an introvert who preferred books, computers, and the internet. He was nice enough to talk to, but usually kept to himself. When Tim arrived, towel around his neck, book in hand, no one paid much attention. He found a quiet spot off to the side and buried himself in his book while Jimmy dove into the pool. Life would have gone on as usual if a group of mischievous kids hadn't spotted Tim alone. Like a pack of hyenas, they closed in on him. 2 of them grabbed his ankles and lifted him off the ground, while the other 2 secured his arms. Tim clutched his book tightly to his chest as they carried him toward the pool. The pool's activities stopped, and everyone turned to watch. In one swift motion, they threw him into the air, yanking at his book, shirt, and towel as he flew over the water. He landed with a splash, unharmed, as the 4 kids dropped his belongings at the edge and walked away, savoring their victory. The lifeguard whistled at them to stop, but they ignored him. Everyone laughed as Tim's head emerged from the water, wide-eyed. No harm done, or so they thought. Tim, now feeling embarrassed but determined, swam toward the edge to grab his towel and clothes. But just before reaching them, he bumped into another swimmer gliding beneath the water's surface. Startled, he shoved the swimmer aside, grabbed his towel, and fled from the pool area, leaving his book and shirt behind. I was about to ask Keith about the strange encounter when his mother, noticing the distress on his face, rushed over to find out what was wrong. Keith, still dripping wet, whispered something to her, pointing in Tim's direction. She immediately signaled Tim's mom, and the 2 of them hurried out with a couple of others in tow. I must have thought he was hurt, imagining blood drifting through the water. I climbed out and waited, my mom among the nervous group of adults. Keith walked over, his mask pushed up onto his head and a towel wrapped around him. Did he cut himself? I asked. I repeated myself when I saw he hadn't heard me. Keith shook his head. Then what? I asked quickly. The suspense is killing me. He has a female chest, came the muffled reply from under the towel. He what? He has chest. I thought I was swimming up on one of the girls without a top on, but when I saw it was him, I freaked out. I didn't fully understand, but I knew something strange was going on. Across the parking lot, between a minivan and an SUV, I saw the group of women had gathered around him. They were shielding him from view, which meant something serious was happening. Feminine chest on a guy, I thought. Something definitely strange was going on. Only a minute or 2 passed before the sound of sirens reached us. Dust clouded the air as an ambulance and emergency vehicle arrived. One of the mothers waved them down, and after taking Tim inside, the group of women hustled back to the pool, clearing everyone out. A few kids, who had arrived without parents, ignored the orders and continued swimming. I was already out, following my mom to our car, and a crowd of kids lined up behind us as we left. "What happened to Tim?" I asked. "Nothing," she replied. "He's fine." I could see her hands shaking, and it was clear something was off. We lived on the outskirts of town, so it only took a few minutes before the traffic thinned, and we were back in our driveway. Just as we were about to step inside, I heard the phone ringing and 2 messages already on the answering machine. "Head upstairs and get changed," she said. "Play upstairs for a while too." I did as she asked, tossing my wetsuit in the bathroom shower stall and heading up. I could hear excited chatter rising up the stairs and was immediately curious. I crept as close as I could and listened intently for any information. Luckily, my brother was gone, and the upstairs was quiet. Dad was still at work, and Mom was too distracted to notice. The only sound in the house was her voice. "Tonight at the high school." "Got it." 5 p.m. That didn't give me much, and I knew Mom wasn't going to let me out of her sight to find out what was really happening. "Cheryl, did you hear?" "Yeah, pretty weird." "Yes, tonight at 5. "Okay, see you there." "No, I'm not bringing the boys either." "Bye." She hung up one call and dialed another. The phone didn't stop ringing that afternoon as she repeated the same process. There was nothing new, so I gave up and headed for my room. The TV downstairs held no clues, and I turned it off in frustration. Maybe they'd tell me more tomorrow. The next morning, I woke up to sunshine pouring through the window. It must have been late because Dad had already left for work, and Mom was busy with her daily chores. She was being evasive, and it was clear she knew more than she was letting on. Our town was small, and news like this would spread soon enough. I just hoped it was sooner rather than later. While doing my chores, I grabbed the paper from the stoop outside. I mindlessly dropped the trash into the can, but my eyes locked onto the newspaper. I saw a partial photo and headline, and I knew immediately it was Tim's yearbook picture. I snatched it up, but before I could retreat, a sharp jab to my palm caught my attention. Without thinking, I reacted and crushed my fist into the spot where I'd been stung. I didn't spare more than a second for the wasp or bee as I grabbed the paper, tossed aside the intruder, and quietly made my way through the kitchen. The vacuum cleaner was running in the living room, masking my movements as I headed upstairs to my room, clutching the paper like a prized possession. Once I was safely inside my room, I quickly unwrapped the paper and unfolded the front page. The headline read, "Local boy infected," and beneath it was a picture of Tim. My heart raced as I scanned the article. It explained how Tim had gone through a drastic physical change over the past couple of weeks. The symptoms started with a sore throat and a rash, but soon included weight loss, chest tissue expansion, and a loss of excitement. Blood tests revealed that his Y chromosome had essentially gone into hibernation, and his body had started to rely on the dormant X chromosome for instructions, resulting in this transformation. The article mentioned a chaotic meeting the previous evening, where local parents and citizens reacted strongly. Scientists from the university and the CDC were being brought in to investigate. Until more was known, the town's routine would be disrupted. I put the paper down, my mind racing with the possibilities. If Tim's body was undergoing such a transformation, could it happen to others? Could it happen to me? As I read the last part of the story, it mentioned that townspeople would be asked to come in for private examinations and screenings. Today was the day for the screenings, organized by last name. Suddenly, I heard footsteps on the stairs. With lunch approaching, I quickly folded the paper, wrapped it back up with the rubber band, and jumped to my feet. I tossed it out the window toward the door below, and it landed on the lawn just inches from the front steps. I quickly pulled the screen back into place as the door opened. "What are you up to?" "You look like you're hiding something," she said. "Nothing," I replied, trying to seem less guilty. It's like mothers always know. I asked if it was time for lunch, and it was. Then I asked if I could go out and play after lunch, but as expected, I couldn't. I tried again, asking if we could go to the pool. We weren't going. We're going out after lunch, but it's a surprise, she said, turning on her heel and heading downstairs. I followed, already knowing exactly what the surprise was. After lunch, we climbed into the family van and slowly drove into town. I knew where we were heading. Once I was sure of it, I asked why we were going to the school, hoping I'd get more answers. We turned onto the entrance, and I was surprised by the number of cars crammed into the lot. The police were directing traffic, but it was slow going. News trucks lined the playground, their dish antennas sticking up like a field of flowers. We parked and joined the line, and I recognized most of the kids and some of their moms. Dad would come after work, and I imagined they'd have to drag Noah here too, probably against his will, but that was just his way, at least it was until 2 months ago. Probably another rebellious phase. The line moved quickly. Reporters shouted questions, but the crowd ignored them. Cameras flashed as they panned back and forth, trying to get anything they could. As we neared the doors, it started to feel like voting day. Go in one door, check in at a table, show your ID, and then wait in another line into the gymnasium. After about 20 minutes and a few more questions, we had the paperwork and were directed to one of the small tents set up inside. We sat at a table with a stern-looking woman in white, answering more questions. Then, Mom stood up and disappeared behind a portable screen. She talked quietly with someone out of sight. When she came around the corner, she waved me over. She was with a doctor, who removed my shirt and gave me a quick visual check. "Any rashes?" he asked in a deep voice. I shook my head. "Appetite all right?" he asked Mom more than me, but we both nodded. "All right, thanks for coming in." He tossed his gloves into the trash, and we were ushered out the back of the tent. I was trying to figure out what was going on when I heard a woman's cries. She was being guided toward the rear entrance, one of her sons with her. The doors opened, and an ambulance roared to life, ready to go. A man in fatigues led the other boy toward one of the front offices. It didn't take a genius to figure out what had happened. Little Joey Abrahams was going through the same changes as Tim. It had started, or the doctors wouldn't have noticed it yet. On the drive home, Mom did her best to explain what was happening. By the time we got home, tears were welling up in her eyes. I was sent to the living room to watch TV while we waited for Dad to come home. When I wandered into the kitchen around dinner time, I reached for a glass by the sink. Mom shut up and quickly directed me to the canned soda in the fridge. Not long after, Dad came home, with Noah trailing behind him. Neither looked too happy, but Dad seemed relieved after hearing about our day. My brother acted aloof, disappearing upstairs. When the dinner bell rang, he quickly appeared, sat down, and dug in like he hadn't eaten in days. Either his appetite was strong, or he was forcing himself to eat. I pushed my first few spoonfuls of mashed potatoes around the plate, noticing that the other 3 were watching me with mixed emotions, and my appetite wasn't as strong as usual. "What?" I said. "I snuck a candy bar 2 hours ago. Not really hungry yet." They all looked away. My brother seemed indifferent, Dad relieved, and Mom almost disappointed. She returned to her meal without saying a word. After dinner, we cleared the dishes, and rain started falling outside. We all rushed to close the windows, and once we were done, I was told to head upstairs, just like my brother. Before I even hit the stairs, Dad had the TV on, tuned to the only news channel we could get. The blaring radio from my brother's room made it hard to hear, but Dad turned the volume down when he caught a few key words. Naturally, the lead story was about the events of the day. A total of 4 victims have already been identified, the anchor read smoothly. All of the victims are male youths, and researchers believe that while similar infections may be occurring in young females, the loss of one X chromosome doesn't seem to cause the same physical changes. No adults have been found to show similar symptoms. For now, the CDC is recommending that all males under the age of 18 stay inside as much as possible and that all water be boiled before use. We'll have an interview with the head researcher from CMU in the next hour. That was all they had, of course. Parents always stayed glued to the TV, hoping for more. Disappointed by the lack of new information, I headed back to my room and lay down on my bed. I think this was the moment I began to realize something was happening. The rain had stopped, the bugs were back in full force, and the evening was unfolding like any other. But I could feel a slight change, my heart was racing, and though I didn't have a sore throat, I felt a strange pang of disappointment. My palms were sweaty, and when I checked my right hand, I noticed a small red spot in the center. A tiny dot, right where the sting had been earlier. My breath caught for a second before I remembered, this was from the wasp that had stung me. It had looked like any other wasp, so it couldn't be the cause of the strange transformations happening to Tim and the others. But I couldn't shake the frustration of lying there, wondering if being part of this bizarre phenomenon would be a blessing or some kind of twisted dream come true. From a young age, I always knew I was different. Being young didn't make it any easier, there were enough crises to deal with, and another one definitely wasn't welcome. I would often daydream that somehow a mistake had been made, and I was really a girl. Or that some genie or time portal would come and grant my wish to change how I looked, how I dressed, and how people treated me. But now, seeing how that woman had rushed out of the gym in tears today, I wondered if I truly wanted what I had once wished for. It was a confusing time. I stared at my palm again, watching to see if the redness was spreading or darkening. I doubted it had changed in the 2 minutes since I last checked, but it did seem slightly darker now. I leaned back and tried not to look, focusing instead on the swirling paint pattern on the ceiling above me. My eyelids grew heavy, and eventually, I drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, the night had passed, and I found myself tucked under the covers, safely away from the world. It was Saturday, mid-morning, and the house was quiet. I could hear the occasional sizzle of something on the stove and the rustle of newspaper. My brother was probably still asleep. He usually woke up after noon and stayed up well past midnight, especially now that the curfew only applied to those under 16. I dragged myself out of bed, groggy, and stumbled down the hall to the bathroom. Looking in the mirror before stepping into the shower, I saw that nothing had really changed. The pang of disappointment grew as I inspected my palm. The sting had sealed up, and the redness and swelling had almost completely disappeared. Great, I muttered to myself as I turned on the water. Once it was warm enough, I stepped into the shower with a frustrated sigh. I quickly shampooed my hair, barely awake. Then I grabbed the soap and began washing my body, though it felt more like a half-hearted effort. But as I continued, I felt something change. My hand slid across my chest, and I looked down. There, where I hadn't noticed before, was a slight protrusion. My chest seemed fuller. It wasn't a dramatic change, but once my brain noticed it, my eyes couldn't unsee the subtle roundness. My hands continued to glide over the small mound, and a faint sensation of pleasure rose within me. In that moment, I felt a surge of overwhelming joy. The night before, I had decided that if I could, I would run through every forest, swamp, and patch of grass, drinking from every water source I could find. I didn't know what the consequences would be, but I hoped that I, too, would become part of this strange phenomenon. I thought that maybe only those who feared the results would be affected, while those of us who secretly wished for such changes would somehow be immune. It all seemed unfair, but for once, a small sliver of hope fluttered in my chest. Don't waste all the water. My brother's voice broke through the moment, and I quickly turned toward the stream of water, hoping it would conceal my newfound, wondrous change. I knew I was being ridiculous. I had barely noticed any change myself, and anyone inspecting me would be hard-pressed to see anything different in my physique. Still, a sense of relief washed over me when I heard him leave the room and head downstairs. I turned off the water, quickly dried off, and wiped the mirror, hoping to catch a glimpse of the new me. As you can guess, it was disappointing. My self-esteem wasn't exactly stellar, and after envisioning what I hoped I could be, it was a letdown to realize that I still looked the same. The sow's ear was not the silk purse I had imagined. I checked the hall, found it clear, and dashed to my room. I threw on a new t-shirt and pair of shorts, then ran a comb through my chestnut-colored hair. There was a certain joy in knowing I could now let it grow out. The thought crossed my mind that if I were indeed infected, I would keep it a secret as long as possible before the changes became irreversible. I took a last glance in the mirror, feeling like something was subtly different, even if no one else would notice. My chest felt strangely prominent, though I knew the most likely way I'd give myself away was by acting differently. Looking back, I understood Tim's odd behavior. I just had to act natural. "Jamie," my mom called from downstairs. "Breakfast." I caught myself whistling as I headed down and quickly stopped when I reached the stairs. I almost convinced myself I could feel the subtle bounce of my chest with each step. This was going to be an interesting week, and I needed to keep it a secret for as long as possible. The cooler weather and the town's isolation would give me a chance to lay low. Normally, by late summer, I'd be watching the days pass with dread as school loomed closer. But this week, each day dragged on painfully slow. I had been avoiding family time, going to bed early, and sleeping as late as I could. The cool weather meant sweatshirts were needed, and with the pool closed, I didn't need to make excuses not to swim. My luck had held for a few days, and life seemed to be returning to its slow pace. Dad was still working, and Noah, in his typical rebellious fashion, stayed away as much as possible. That left me to wander the house and avoid my mom, who was busy with her usual chores. Tomorrow was Saturday, and I'd only have to dodge Dad, who'd be occupied with his lawn chores. So far, my plan was working perfectly. It was Friday morning. The sun had climbed high, beaming through my window. It had to be late morning, and I lay there, basking in the warmth. The next thing I heard was the shuffle of footsteps in my room. My mom was dusting the bookshelves, as she often did, working her way around the room while I pretended to sleep. I'm not sure why I did it, but I cracked an eye and watched her go about her chore, spraying the cloth and moving from the shelves to my brother's bed frame and then to my desk. And then it happened. It only lasted 2 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. As she sprayed the cloth again and turned, she did a double take. In that instant, I realized my thin t-shirt had shifted enough to reveal the rounded mound of a chest. The warmth from the sun had loosened the covers, and I had unconsciously kicked them away in my sleep. Panic surged through me, but I froze, feigning deep sleep while my mind raced. My arm instinctively slid down to cover my chest. The change had been gradual over the past few days, but now it was undeniable. The sensitive feeling of the fabric against my pointer was intense. The fear of being caught by my mom was thrilling in its own way, but I dared not move. She must have seen something, but I didn't want to risk any movement. I stayed still, praying she wouldn't confront me. After a few moments, I heard her footsteps softly padding across the carpet, and then I knew she was leaving. I heard the creak of the floorboard at the bottom of the stairs, signaling her retreat. I cracked my eye again, breathing a sigh of relief. I could almost convince myself I'd escaped detection. I slowly slid out from under the sheets and crept to the door. I heard her moving about in the kitchen but didn't hear her talking on the phone, like I'd expected. It seemed like my secret was safe, until I heard a car door slam outside my window. How could she have signaled anyone? I rushed to the edge of the curtains and looked out, just in time to see our car, with Mom behind the wheel, pull out of the driveway and speed away. I finished getting dressed in the oversized sweatshirt, socks, and baggy Levi's from yesterday. Panicked, I raced downstairs, my chest now bouncing for real with each step. I looked around frantically, wondering what to do. Should I hide? Should I leave the house and come back later? I was still confused when I spotted a note on the kitchen counter. Jamie had to run out. Stay inside and I'll be back shortly. Love, Mom. She was headed toward town, which could only mean one thing: she was going for help. Convinced that an official convoy would soon arrive, I resigned myself to my fate and sat in front of the TV, munching on dry cereal. Unlike most mornings, my appetite felt unusually strong, and I quickly finished nearly half the box. Just as I was settling in, I heard a car return. The back door opened, and I heard footsteps on the linoleum. "Jamie," she called. "Are you out of bed yet?" I didn't answer right away, but she must have heard the TV as she peeked around the corner. When she saw me sitting there, she smiled. "I have a surprise for you." I didn't even look up from the screen. My heart raced in my chest as I thought to myself, I bet you do. Probably a group of CDC agents waiting behind her in the hallway. "Stay right here and I'll call you when I'm ready, okay?" I muttered, barely able to speak. I heard her retreat upstairs, and a moment later, she returned. So far, no team of commandos had stormed the room, so I tried to relax. She came back from the car and headed upstairs again. "I'm ready," she practically shouted down the stairs. I figured there was no point in waiting anymore. I had to admit, my feelings had shifted from anxiety to curiosity. I rose slowly from the couch, my feet feeling as heavy as bricks. My palms were sweaty, and the handrail didn't help much. As I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated, unsure of what to do next, until I heard her voice again. I followed the sounds to her room and stood in the doorway, finding it hard to meet her gaze. "Come sit with me for a while?" she asked, that same smile still on her face, though I could see tears welling in her eyes. I shook my head, staring at the floor. "Please," she pleaded, her arms outstretched. Hesitantly, I took a few steps, but stopped just short of her embrace. "Come on, just a little more," she urged, motioning with her hands. Finally, I took the plunge. "I know what's happening." She wrapped her arms around me, holding me tight. It had been a year since I'd protested hugs like this, but I had forgotten how comforting they were. This one felt different, though, with the new changes in my body. Even Mom noticed the difference in how it felt. She grabbed both sides of my shirt and tugged, but I instinctively kept my arms wrapped tightly around my chest. She gave me that familiar look, and I raised my arms, complying. The shirt came off, and my arms immediately went around me again, unwilling to let go. She gently pushed my arms to my sides, and we both stared at the rounded shapes that had appeared on my chest. Smooth, pale skin rose to form two tender pink peaks. Mom gasped in amazement, and I felt overwhelmed with emotion. My tears, however, were mistaken for sadness. She must have thought I was upset. "Don't cry, dear," she said softly. "I'm sure this will all work out. You'll just have to grow up a little faster than you expected." I wasn't crying out of sadness, though. The tears were a mix of joy and confusion. If Dad could accept this too, it might just work out after all. I could only hope Noah's indifference would apply here, though I wasn't so sure. And then there was the issue of school and friends. My mind raced as I tried to process it all. Mom stood up from the bed and knelt by a few boxes I hadn't noticed. I shivered slightly in the cool room and caught my reflection in the full-length mirror. From the waist down, my socks and jeans hid my lanky frame, but from the waist up, I looked different. My smooth skin stretched over my long, thin arms, and the two rounded chests stuck out ahead of me. The curly hair and long lashes added to the feminine look. I could feel the butterflies in my stomach, but for some reason, there was no excitement, no typical reaction I'd have when looking at something I found thrilling. I thought of the embarrassing times I had raided my mom's lingerie drawer, but today was different. When she motioned for me to strip further, I couldn't help but feel self-conscious. Even with everything going on, I couldn't bear the thought of undressing while something else was so visible. I pulled off my socks and dropped my jeans to the floor. I stepped out of them, and Mom, being the mom she was, picked them up, folded them neatly, and set them aside. Finally, I removed my underwear and tossed them towards my jeans. Unsure of what would happen next, I glanced up at her. She had opened a plain brown bag from next to her, her hands shaking slightly as she reached inside. "You're going to love this," she said softly, finally pulling something from the bag. "Here, try these on." She tore open the cellophane and handed me a pair of cotton underwear. I didn't quite understand why she was giving me new underwear, but when I opened them up, I could see they were the softest pink. The tears started to well up in my eyes as I slipped one leg into each hole and pulled them up, feeling the soft fabric against my thighs. As I pulled them up further, the snug material wrapped around my hips and stomach. They were smaller and more feminine than my usual pair, and the pink was a stark contrast to the usual white. I rubbed my hands over the fabric, feeling a rush of sensations overwhelm me. I shivered, but it wasn't from the cold of the room. The cotton wasn't as silky as the items I'd borrowed from my mom's drawers, but it felt different, like I could experience them freely now without the usual guilt. Though I had hoped for this change, I hadn't gone looking for it. The insect had chosen me, and opportunity had knocked at my door. I hadn't actively sought it. With my mom's guidance and acceptance, I was able to experience these dreams without shame. I had seen others like me on TV, people who struggled with their identity and dressed in a way that made them feel right. Most explained that they had been dressed in girls' clothing as children, often by mothers, aunts, or babysitters, and later couldn't stop themselves from continuing. No one had known my secret until now. If I hadn't been forced into it, what would have made me choose it? I understood, even then, that I didn't need coercion to wear the clothes that felt right for me. Guilt was heavy, but if others wanted to believe their actions were someone else's fault, that was their choice. I had my own guilt to work through, but for now, I was just enjoying the moment, staring at my reflection, watching my new self take shape. "You've done this before," she commented, more as a statement than a question. Although everything seemed okay, the guilt came rushing back. It felt morally wrong, like I was lying to everyone. These had been her clothes, after all, maybe even a form of stealing in a way. "You don't have to be afraid, Jamie," she said, sensing my hesitation. It was simple elimination, makeup slightly askew, clothes ruffled, drawers open. It could just as easily have been Noah. She paused. "But my shoes are too small for him." It should have felt okay, given the circumstances, but the guilt still lingered. "Here. Try this on," she said, holding out a matching pink bra. It wasn't the frilly, uncomfortable kind with wires inside, but it had its own kind of appeal. I was in a hurry. "Sorry about the selection," she added, almost apologetic. "We'll take care of that later." I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I put it aside and took the pink bra from her, my fingers shaking slightly. When it became clear I wasn't entirely comfortable with the item, she took it back and showed me how to wear it. "This kind you put on like a jacket," she explained. I fed one arm through a strap, turned, and slipped my other arm into the remaining loop. It was different from the ones my mom wore. "Then you take the clasp and lock it like this," she continued, but her words trailed off as she struggled with the clasp. "Your chest is bigger than I thought," she said, apologizing again. She promised to make it up to me later. I wanted to look at my reflection again, but I resisted. Instead, I focused on her as she reached for another bag behind her. She pulled out a plastic egg, twisted it open, and a pair of tan nylons fluttered onto the carpet. I sat down next to her and watched, intrigued. I carefully began unwrapping the nylons, trying to put them on, but ended up getting the first leg on backward. Once I corrected it, I slowly worked the stocking onto my foot, guiding it up my calf. The soft material clung to my skin, adding a slight color to my pale legs. As I continued, I felt a strange warmth as the material climbed higher, above the knee, before I repeated the process with the other leg. With her help, I pulled them all the way up to my waist. The tight, translucent fabric made my skin tingle, pressing gently in all the right places, leaving my legs smooth and silky. I couldn't help but run my hands over the material, enjoying the sensation. I could have continued for hours, but Mom gently refocused my attention, pulling out a box from beside her. She removed the lid, and inside, a beautiful, floral-patterned outfit folded neatly. The lace edges around the trim made it even more stunning. I wanted to touch it, to hold it, but before I could, the back door slammed shut downstairs with a jolt. I could see the fear in my mom's eyes as she turned to me. "Stay here," she instructed quickly, and then rushed down the stairs. I felt suddenly vulnerable. A quick glance in the mirror confirmed my appearance, and I hurried to the hall, making sure the coast was clear. I snuck into the master bath, locked the door, and waited, listening to the sounds of voices downstairs. They weren't arguing, just talking, Mom and Noah, exchanging pleasant words. Then I heard the door shut again. "Jamie." "Noah's gone," she called up to me. The voice on the other side of the door was calm but firm. "I know you're nervous, but so am I. We'll have to face him again sooner or later, and don't forget about Dad. This isn't going to disappear anytime soon." Her words hit home, and I unlocked the door, realizing she was right. I cracked it open, checked that the coast was clear, and stepped back into the room. My mom gasped when she saw me. "Did you even think about grabbing the dress in case Noah came up here?" "No," I replied, feeling more than a little self-conscious. "I just really wanted to try it on." Her smile grew wider, and then she commented on how I looked. The dress was white with soft pink patterns, cinched at the waist with a wide belt. It had short sleeves and an even shorter skirt, giving it a slightly formal feel. I hadn't seen anything like it at school, though I had noticed similar dresses at church on Easter. I'd always envied the girls who wore them. "Now, the shoes," Mom added with a twinkle in her eye, reaching for the final box. I sat down on the bed and cradled the box in my lap, wanting to savor the moment. With trembling fingers, I carefully removed the lid and set it on the bedspread. Inside, the shoes were wrapped in thin tissue. I carefully peeled back the paper, holding my breath as I uncovered a pair of shiny black patent leather pumps. "They're black patent leather," Mom said, almost as if anticipating my reaction. I wasn't sure about the size, so I made sure they were a little too big instead of too small. "They have a strap, so they'll still fit." She knelt down in front of me and handed me one of the shoes. I slid my foot into it, feeling the soft, smooth material hug my foot as I slipped it on. The shoes fit like a glove. Mom fastened the strap around my ankle, securing it snugly. She repeated the process with the other foot, and I couldn't help but stare down at my feet, admiring how the black patent leather caught the light. When I lifted my eyes, I saw a new reflection in the mirror across the room. A young woman was staring back, where a boy had been just moments before. My hair, now curled and full, framed my face, and even without makeup, I barely recognized myself. Mom stepped aside, allowing me to take in the moment. She gestured toward the vanity in the bathroom. I stood, the shoes clicking on the floor with each step, feeling oddly graceful in them. They were low, square heels, making it easy to walk without worry of losing my balance. Mom had chosen well. I followed her into the bathroom, the click of the heels echoing on the marble tile, sending a strange rush of excitement through me. It was a sound I had always been drawn to, the sharp, crisp click of heels on hard floors. I had always admired it from a distance, but now, walking in those shoes, I felt a part of it. Mom opened a drawer, pulling out the tools she needed, and set a second seat next to her. She motioned for me to sit, and I did, watching as she began to apply makeup with careful hands. I could see her excitement, though she tried to steady herself, afraid of making a mistake. She lined my eyes with precision, then picked up an eyelash brush. The sensation of the brush moving along my lashes was more delightful than I expected, sending a pleasant shiver through me. She returned the brush to the drawer, retrieved a tube of lipstick, and applied a soft pink shade to my lips. After a few swipes, she stepped back to admire her work. "Not much I can do with your hair, Jamie. We'll have to let it grow out for now. My curls were here to stay, for the moment at least." Satisfied with the look, she pulled a small bottle from the desk and spritzed perfume onto my neck and wrists. Finally, she placed a delicate silver necklace around my neck, the charm resting at the top of my newly exposed cleavage. The transformation was complete.